Hey, this is Stacy with the Soul Pod. Welcome back. I'm going to talk about a topic I've talked about many times before because it's an important topic. This video is for anyone who wants to be at least 20% happier. Anyone who is depressed, feels like their depression is completely out of their reach, if they've done everything they can, or maybe they haven't done anything, but they want to be happier. So if you are one of those people, and I have been, this is for you. There are a lot of things that cause depression that we can't do anything about. There are certain things that cause depression that we can do a lot about. So today I want to give you one of those tools. And this is one of those things I will talk about again and again and again, almost evangelize on because of the effect it's had on my life and the benefit that I know that it'll bring you if you use this tool. I'm going to be a little bit of background here to help set this up because it's important to understand where we're at. In the 1980s, so this is a 40-year period we're going to talk about, basically my lifetime since I was a teenager till now. The depression rate in the U.S. and really the Western world was about 2.3 to 3%, right in there, 2.5 to 3, right? The depression rates now reported are about 8.5%. Okay, that's 4 decades. We have about a 300% increase in reported depression rates. People who say, I am depressed, 300% increase. Wow. I'm not going to go into the suicide rates. They're outrageous, they're sad, they're horrific. You can look them up if you want to, but during this same time, those rates have gone way more than 300% increase. In the 80s, about 2% of Americans were on some sort of antidepressant. They first started emerging in the 80s, about 2%. Right now, it's 13%, which is a 600% increase since I was a teenager, right? A young teenager. 600% increase. And at the same time, now in current history, even with all these things that I'm talking about, with antidepressants, with all that, we have the highest rates of depression ever recorded. More people are saying they're depressed or anxious or just out of sorts than ever before. Ever before. And there's a lot of reasons that this is happening. There's a lot of things that are affecting it. There are a lot of stories why, and I think a lot of it is blowback nonsense, smoke screening, that, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just we're better at actually identifying depression and labeling it and diagnosing it. There's a lot of this stuff that's out there. Of course, most of this comes from drug companies and folks like that who have a vested interest in you believing that. Let's assume all of that's correct. Even if we buy that story, still, if you're depressed or you find yourself having depressive moments, which I do, from time to time, I feel down. So who's responsible for that? Well, I'm the front line on that particular battle. I'm the one person who's going to have the most effect on me. And so I do everything in my power to have the most positive outcomes that I can with my attitudes. And there are certain things that we can do. So I'm going to go into some interesting things. I'm going to look at this same time frame, this 40-year period of this depression I'm talking about. And I want to look at something interesting. I want to correlate something for you here that you're going to find interesting as well. Prior to the cable news network, CNN, launching in 1980, there was no 24-hour news cycle. Okay, when I was a kid, you would catch the news at 6 or 11, and it was a half an hour to an hour at the most. Right? This is what's happening today. Now on with the rest of your life. And then at the end of the night, they'd have a capper, usually the same sorts of stories and anything else that came up. Back then, well, I'll go back to that. But in college, I worked at a news station, and at that time, the quote, the motto was still, if it burns or bleeds, it leads, which means that the most horrific crap that happened that day needs to be right in their face, because it's going to lock them in and it's going to keep them watching. That's still the case, except that now you have a 24-hour news cycle. So if it's burning or bleeding, it's in your face 24 hours a day. News never ends. And when they can't find news, they speculate. And when they speculate about the most horrific shit you can possibly imagine. All the worst stuff in the world that might happen. They'll have all these experts on who will say, oh, well, I think what's going to happen is blah, 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 blah. And it's never good. It's never, well, I know all these terrible things are happening in wherever, Ukraine, but really good stuff is coming down. You never hear that kind of sentence coming out of their mouth. It's always, we must do this or this horrible thing will happen. So, of course, we're getting more and more beaten down by this. Now, mind you, CNN launched in 1980, the beginning of these depression stats I'm talking about. So, depression rates are going through the roof. And after the 80s, from early 80s on, they go even higher. Then CNN was followed by Headline News, which is now defunct. But MSNBC, Fox, there's a bunch of 24-hour news stations now worldwide, not just in English-speaking countries, but worldwide. And that's all exploded over the last 40 years. The same time period, strangely enough, the depression rates and suicide rates and SSRI prescriptions have increased massively by hundreds of percentage points, right? Like I said, 600% increase in Americans on antidepressants during that same period of time, 600% increase. So people are taking more antidepressants than ever before and also reporting still the highest level of depression despite the antidepressants. So think about that. What would things be like if we weren't taking antidepressants? I mean, the suicide rate, not to joke about it, but it is abysmal. And we are just taking fistfuls of antidepressants. So what can you do about it? You're like, shut up, Stacy, for God's sake, I get the point. The point is, there is something we can do about this. There's a lot we can do about this. I want to talk about, there's a Pew Research study that came out. Their finding was that constant access to news led to a higher stress and anxiety. So this is documented. The reason I want to mention the Pew Research study is it is documented that if you watch the news, you will have higher anxiety and depression, period. Full stop, okay? So I'm not making this up. I'm talking from my personal experience, which has been, I quit the news about 8 years ago now, and I've never been happier, right? This is the happiest period of my life. There are a lot of other things that play into that as well. I've also increased my meditation during that time, but that played a huge role in this. If you want to be at least 20% happier, turn off your TV and stop watching the news. If you have a hard time doing that, I get it. And the reason is, it's an addiction. It is an addiction that they bank on you continuing to have because it puts money in their pockets. I want to talk a little bit about the increase also in, I looked up some stats before I started this and I didn't write them down. But so amusingly, you know who the number one advertiser is on cable news? Pharma. Big Pharma spends almost $6.5 billion a year on advertising, and the number one thing they advertise more than anything else on these stations is antidepressants. So you're watching a channel that depresses the crap out of you, wrecks your mood, makes you anxious, and you get to watch commercials about antidepressants, which, by the way, you can't prescribe to yourself. Only a doctor can do that. But they're putting it right in your face. You're looking at the problem and you're looking at the solution. It's all right there. Is that an accident? I don't think so. You don't spend trillions or billions of dollars a year on advertising. Billions of dollars, almost $6.5 billion. That's insane, right? Crazy. I'll take that money. Forget the advertising. We'll do some good stuff with it. Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you'll find strength. Outside events are what we're looking at when we're watching the news. We're watching the news, we're watching a whole bunch of stuff that we have zero control over. Now, there's a great argument about you need to know what's going on in the world so that you can be aware and you can be educated and you can be a good citizen. But what are you going to do about anything? Pick one thing in your mind right now that you're anxious about what's going on in the world. Do you honestly think that you have a tangible effect on that, or that you can have a tangible effect on that? We can have a tangible effect locally. Here we can. The closer it is to us, the more of a tangible effect we can have. You can write your congressman about it. Do you think they'll listen to you? I can't think of the last time I talked to, wrote a congressman or congressperson and, made a point and felt like I was heard. But the closer you get to your sphere of influence locally, I'm not that far from Sacramento, which is the state capital, so I think I have a little bit of impact maybe on the state level. But The reality is you can be as anxious as you want about what's happening in the world, no matter what that thing is that's stressing you out. And the effect that you're going to have on it is about that. So what's the value in watching the news? What's the value? If you're having a hard time quitting, it's because you're hooked on it, because they count on you being hooked on it. The anxiety that's building in your body that makes you feel like if you don't watch, some bad thing is going to happen. Well, it's not. You want to test that? This is it. Watch the news for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long. Turn it off, take a couple deep breaths, and walk outside. It is a damn beautiful day today. My front yard right now it's heaven. It is heaven out here. You look at the TV, you watch the news, and the world is hell. It's misery. It's terrible. Everything's coming to an end. But you go outside, the world ain't that bad. It's really not. Even in the worst neighborhood in the world, it's not quite as bad as it is on TV. Unless you happen to be in the neighborhood they're reporting on. I want to read a couple quotes too from a couple of noted people. Ralph DeBelly, he's an author of The Art of Thinking Clearly. These are guys that had something to say about news. He advises against consuming news. He says it can be addictive and create a distorted perception of reality when you watch the news. Yeah, okay. That's sort of kind of a no-brainer. It's exactly what I'm talking about. He's also the noted philosopher and sociologist Noam Chomsky. He says that news consumption can trap people in cycles of fear and distraction. Yeah. Again, these guys are underlining my point. The scientist Carl Sagan also criticizes media consumption. He expresses concerns over the effects of media on public understanding and warns that too much media can make you depressed and anxious. So this isn't something I'm making up. It's something that I figured out on my own, and then I went back later and I looked at the evidence of, and I realized that I had done myself a favor without doing the research. I just realized that when I watch the news, I'm depressed. And when I don't watch the news, I'm much less depressed, much less anxious, much less everything. You know, all the bad stuff is reduced significantly. And I say 20%, that's not a scientific number, but for me, it's probably higher than that. If you want to make your day happier, if you want to feel less anxious, less stressed, less depressed, turn off the TV. Go outside. Spend more time out here. Look at all this. The world's a beautiful place. Turn off the TV and join us. Love you guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And share some comments. If you've quit the news, tell me about it. Write something below. If you have other great suggestions for lowering depression and anxiety, make those suggestions too. Share it with everybody. We can all use a little bit of advice on how to get a little bit happier. Sometimes just a little more each day makes a huge difference. I'll see you guys on the next video.